In the previous video, we talked about forms and how forms are created using the HTML form tag. We learned about action URL, we learned about the post method, and we learned about basic input fields that provide text inputs like we see here in this form that we built in the last video. In this video, we're going to introduce some additional input types that you can use for forms in order to gather user input rather than just using plain text. And we're going to go through a few of those. So let's start out with password. A lot of times we create forms where users need to sign up for an account. And when they sign up for an account, they have to enter in their password, yet we don't want somebody looking over their shoulder to see the password. For that, we have an input type that is for passwords specifically. So although this form is for a contact us form, we're going to keep working in it just to show these additional input types. Let's not get confused that in reality in a contact us form we really wouldn't be adding a password field. But we're going to go ahead and add it to this form just so we can look at it really quickly and see how it all works. So let's add another div and we'll give it the class name input fields like we did the others, even though we don't have a style right now for that. We may create one later on. And in here, this is where we're going to do our demo input types, just so we know that this is just for demo purposes. So input, we can do type password. And when we do a type password on our input type, and normally we would have a label and then a name, but we're trying to get through these quickly, so I'm not going to do that. We are just simply going to add the new password type field. We know that it's going to show up above the submit button because that's where we are in the hierarchy of the document. You can see the submit button right there. So right here, if I start typing, you can see the text, unlike in a text field where you can see the text, it is now blotted out with dots, as you would expect for a password field. So that's a password field. Let's look at a date field, and let's see what we can do with a date field. And when we do a date field, really we just want somebody to be able to put in a date and have it be a valid date. So let's do input type, and let's do date. And let's see how that one works. We've got a date right here, and when we click on those, we can actually do an up and down to select the date, or we can type directly in there. All right, so that's date field for you. Makes it really easy to get an accurate and correct date, as well as delete the date and start over. Really useful field. In the past, we didn't have an input field like this, and we actually had to manually build these using JavaScript. So this is a great addition to the HTML form. So that would be date. And coinciding with date, we can also do time. So if we choose a time input type, so let's do input type, let's do time, and let's see how that one works. As expected, it's very similar to the date, but it is specific to a time, AM or PM. So really good, easy way to block it out as well, or delete it so that we can start over again. Perfect. Just like the date. Makes it really easy. Again, we used to have to do that manually before we got HTML5 and additional input forms or input types for our forms. We can also do a number, so let's do input, let's do type, and let's do number. Let's look at how that one works. So right here, I try to type in some letters. It lets me type E just because I could do scientific formatted numbers that use E in front of them, but if I try to type any other alpha character, it's not going to show up, but I can type in numbers and it doesn't restrict me on my numbers. I can also do decimals in there, but I cannot add characters. So Really good way to get it so that you can get just simply numeric input from a user without worrying about them providing a combination of alphanumeric, which could blow things up or cause problems on your back end. In conjunction with a number, we can also do an input type of range. And a range allows us to select a range right here of numbers that we're going to allow the user to select from. And with range, in order to make sure we know exactly what we're doing here, we need to add a min and a max to it. So we'll do min, let's just do 0, and we're going to allow them to pick 0 through 10. And then if we come back here, reload it, as it goes here, it's going to allow them to select between 0 and 10 when they do this range. And then it would be your responsibility to make sure that you display what they select in a label up here using a little bit of JavaScript magic. But it does give you a slider, and then that slider provides values in between 0 and whatever, well, between the min and max that you provide. And then you can show what that is in a label up here with a little bit of JavaScript by checking to see what the value is of this input and then making that the value of the label. We're not going to do that right now because we haven't gotten into JavaScript yet, but just know that you can use this and you can show dynamically what the selected value is. If you don't do that, it's still selecting a value, and when you click submit on the form, there will be, based on the name that you give this, so if I said name and then I said age, then you would have a key value pair inside of your dictionary that gets submitted when you click submit that has the key as age and then the value, whatever they selected on the slider, between your min and your max. And then that would be sent over to your server when the form gets submitted. So that gives us a range. Now up here we had a phone number as part of our contact us form, and when we gather phone numbers can have very different formats based on the country that you are in. And so you have to make sure that you know what country you're in and what format you're going to be looking for in your form. And so when we use the telephone or phone number input type, so let's go back up here to our phone right here, and let's change it from text to tel for telephone. But we need to make sure that we are capturing a US telephone number. So to do that, we use what's called a regular expression, and we identify a pattern using regular expressions right here. And then when we go to put in the phone number, it should follow that pattern. Oops, I forgot to fill this one out because I said it was required. Oops, not Time Clark, but Tim Clark. Got to fill this one out because I made it required. All right, so format doesn't match. So let's do 123-123-1234, submit. Format doesn't fit. And that is because right here, this regular expression is actually asking for any number, so 3 numbers that are 0 to 9. And we know US phone numbers are 3, 3, and then 4. So let's try that again. We'll do Tim Clark, at neumont.edu, and then 123-123-1234, and the format should work, and our page submitted. Okay, so right here, regular expression. You can go learn about regular expressions on your own. We will learn a little bit about them when we do JavaScript, but just so you know, really what this is saying is we have a single number that is any number between 0 and 9, and then that pattern repeats 3 times. Then we're looking for a dash, and then the same thing happens again. We're looking for 3 numbers that are 0 through 9, and then 4 numbers that are 0 through 9, all separated by dashes. So regular expressions on your telephones or telephone numbers. All right, now let's talk about URLs. A lot of times we may have people inputting URLs or asking them, what is your portfolio URL, or what's your GitHub account URL? What's the URL to your GitHub user account? And for that, you want to make sure that the user is providing you with a valid URL. So let's go back to our form, and here's our URL. If I type some stuff in there, got to make sure. To make this easier, let's remove our required from those so that we're not constantly getting bothered by those. All right, not required anymore. Okay, so submit. Good. So now let's put some content in here, try to submit it, and it's not a valid URL, so we get an error message back. So let's make it valid. Let's say https://www.neumont.edu. Now that it is valid, we should be able to submit the form. All right, so URL, really useful if you're asking people to provide you with URLs through a web form. Another cool one is we can say search, and we can create a search field, and with that search field, we can specify the name of the search field. And so let's say maybe this particular search field searches Google. And if we come back to our document right here, you can see it looks like all the other search fields that we see. And of course you can change the styling, but it doesn't look like a regular text box. It has a different look and feel to it. It's a little inset, and it's got some shadowing to it. And it kind of makes it look like a different field than the rest. So that's a search field. And for that, you would use JavaScript to pull whatever's in there and then search Google or search any other search engine. Let's go ahead and let's do a line break here to make sure that our stuff shifts down since we've already reached the edge of our screen. We got a couple more to go. Let's look at creating checkboxes. So checkboxes we use quite frequently in forms in order for people to check different things that they would like or information they would like. So we'll do input, we'll do type, and we're going to do a checkbox. And then we can give it a name, of course, so that we know what it is. We haven't been putting names on everything else, but we'll add names to this. And we're going to call this option 1. And the value is going to be, let's see, our form right here is asking for more information. So let's say I want more information on the BSCS, so the computer science program. And then we're going to say BSCS info. Oops, I don't want to close a div on that. All right, so that gives us an input type of checkbox. So let's copy it really quick. We'll put a break between them so that they're all not right next to each other. We'll put another one in. And let's do option 2. And we're going to say the BSWD, so the web development. And then let's just do one more just for the fun of it. And we'll do option 3. And this is for the BSGD or game development program. Now if we go back to our form, we should see checkboxes right here for these 3 different degrees. And we can say, yes, we would like information on those. So that would give us a checkbox. Now checkboxes, they allow us to select as many of the checkboxes as we want because they're all independent. And they all have an independent name, which means they become their own independent key value pair inside the dictionary that gets submitted by the form. So we would have an option 1 with BSCS, we'd have an option 2 with BSWD, and an option 3 with BSGD. Now we're going to talk about radio buttons. Now radio buttons are set up to be different than checkboxes. Radio buttons are meant to be select one out of a group of options. So let's figure out how we do radio buttons on this. And we want to make sure that, number one, you can only select one of the radio button options instead of selecting as many as you want, like you can do with checkboxes. And we want them to be grouped together so that way when we select one, we only get one value in one key pair or key value pair that ends up in the dictionary. And what I mean by that is we've got this input type. Each of these had names, so they came back, and if you didn't select it, then you would have no value in option 1, no value in option 2, and no value in option 3. But if you did select it, then you would have those values, right? Now, on our radio buttons, what we're going to do is we've got an input type radio, and we're going to give it a name. But what we're going to do is we're going to make the name the same inside of this. So let's go ahead and think of something we would like to ask. And let's say they're either a high school graduate, some college, or no college at all, or not a high school graduate. And you can really only be, well, I guess you could be a couple of those. So let's go with won't disclose, high school graduate, or some college, or in college, or something like that. Let's do that. So let's say school status is going to be the name of our radio button group. And the value of this one is going to be high school. And we'll just say in high school. And we'll give ourselves a break. And then let's do the same thing here. I'm going to copy it so that I don't have to redo retype everything. All right, so unlike the checkboxes where they each had different or unique names, we're going to keep the name the same across all of these radio buttons. That way, whichever one is selected ends up being the value for this key in our dictionary that gets sent by the form when it posts. So we got high school, we got college, in college, and then let's do none. Oops. All right. So here we should have radio buttons right here, in high school, in college, and none. And we can only select one of the three, and that is because they all belong to this key in the form. And that, what it does is it forces you to only be able to select one of them. As soon as you select a different one, the other ones are unselected because this key will have the current value of whichever one is selected, and therefore the others are deselected. So radio button's really good if you want somebody selecting only one option in your form. The next one that we have, which is very similar to radio buttons, where if we don't want to take up a ton of room by listing out all the options in the form like radio buttons, we can use an HTML select element. And a select element, all it does is it creates a drop-down list that we have all seen. And we use select, which is the element. Instead of input, we're using the element select. We're going to give it a name, and let's say, oh, let's just do cars, because that's easy. And then inside of the select, we're going to use a child element called option, and we're going to give it a value, and this value will be whatever is set to the key cars inside of the dictionary that gets sent by the form. And let's say we've got ourselves a Mustang. Well, let's do lowercase because that's a value. Let's do Mustang. And let's do option value. Let's do Camaro. Is that how you spell Camaro? I believe it's how you Chevy. Ah, it's an A. Let's do Camaro. All right. Camaro. And then let's do let's throw a curveball in there, and let's say a RAM 2500. So we got cars, but now we're chucking a truck in there. RAM 2500. Say it's a diesel. All right. So now when we go back to our form, instead of all of our options taking up a ton of room like the radio buttons do, instead we have a drop or pop-up list. It's usually a drop-down list if you've got enough room at the bottom. And then you can select the one that you want. I'm kind of a truck guy, so I'm going to go with the RAM 2500. And that gives us the drop-down list. One other cool input that we can use in our forms that can be very useful if we have a form that a user might want to reset, or they might want to clear everything they did, is we can do reset as an element. And then we can provide that reset button. And if we have a bunch of values in here, we can go ahead and click reset, and it wipes out all of the form elements in the form. Now, reset you might use in some situations. In other situations, you're not going to want to reset form, because sometimes as a user completes a form, even if they don't submit it, you could actually have live JavaScript capturing everything that they type without them ever clicking submit. And that's a sneaky way to make sure that if somebody fills out their forms, you can still gather the information that they're submitting even if you don't have all of it. So you can still get a partial record of what was filled out in the form before they submit. Kind of sneaky, but often it is done. All right, so those are a lot of the HTML inputs and controls that you can add to a form to gather user input in a form. And this will be extremely useful as you begin to build out your website and when you want to begin gathering information from users.